So, and I want to start just by introducing Christina Miranda. She is a consumer education specialist at the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Consumer and Business Education. And that is our primary arm for our consumer outreach, where we've really been building, improving our outreach to Spanish language communities, Latinos, and she's been part of that effort. So Christina, please. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the panel for developing improved strategies for educating and reaching out to LEP Latinos about debt collection. As he mentioned, my name is Christina Miranda, and I'll be the moderator for this fantastic panel that we have today. We are going to devote at least 30 to 35 minutes of a robust discussion, and then we'll hopefully have some questions from the audience that I will read and we will answer. Today, we're going to discuss where consumers, consumer advocates, and collectors can look for educational materials about debt collection. We'll also hear some explanations of current strategies that are being used for debt collection in terms of educating consumers and also with business education. We have, as I mentioned, a wonderful lineup of panelists today, so I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organizations and what they do. Gail?
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's here and who's stayed with us all day for bringing your passion, your expertise, and for many of you, your life's work to this issue and similar issues. I'm going to mention the mission of the CFPB, and then later during the Q&A, I'm going to talk about how we really need to widen our frame from information to the larger information of financial capability, and how we build that for all consumers living here in America, including our LEP populations. Community service entities and places like schools and workplaces all have a role to play in creating a financially capable populace over time, a place that really supports the ability for people to build the skills they need to make the money choices that will serve their own life goals. And that's a challenge that's going to take every one of us in this room. And if we do it right, people will get those skills long before they face a call from a debt collector. During the Q&A, I'll also talk about some very specific tools that the CFPB has on offer for the people you serve. Now, why are we engaged in this work? The mission of the CFPB is to make the consumer financial services markets work for everyone, to do it through making rules more effective, by consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control of their economic lives. Most of today's panel will be talking about the more control piece, and it's my privilege to lead our Division of Consumer Education and Engagement, where we do a lot of that work. We prepare materials, we communicate and engage both with individual consumers and with the intermediaries and service groups who serve them. And those intermediaries and partnerships that you've been hearing about throughout the day are quite important. We have teams in financial education, in digital engagement, and also focusing on 4 special populations: students, seniors, service members and veterans, and our Office of Financial Empowerment, which focuses solely on America's low-income and economically vulnerable consumers. And each one of those special populations also has limited English proficiency consumers within it. We take the view that our job is bigger than giving information. It's helping to create the ecosystem and infrastructure and supports around the country, working with local people who are in local communities to support the building and sustaining of financial capability. Financial capability is the ability to manage your own financial life so that it adds to, rather than detracts from, your life goals. And that's a challenge for many consumers today in America, not only for limited English proficiency consumers. So we'll talk about that in this context. I'd like to agree with something I know several of my colleagues are going to say, and that is that the challenges for Spanish-speaking LEP consumers are not monolithic. It's not one community, it's many communities. And we have to have solutions that are as nuanced and as complicated as the communities themselves. Some people will be well served by a website, but many others will need a more personal touch for certain situations or just to get started in some of these difficult topics. We need to work with groups in the local communities where people are already going for services and where there's already a trust relationship. So I'd like to thank all of you that we're already working with here in California, especially the LA County Department of Consumer Affairs, and of course, longstanding warriors in the field like the AG's office in many states, including here in California. So I'm going to pause there. We'll talk a whole lot more about how to do it as we get into the panel. Thank you.
Great. Maritza?
My name is Maritza Reyna. I'm with Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Orange County. I'm the education manager at that agency. Our mission is to provide financial stability for individuals and families through education and counseling. So what we do is we go ahead and we use a two-pronged approach. We have a face-to-face counseling. We do it over the telephone, online, and it's kind of more to educate consumers on how they could better manage their money, whether it's, talking face-to-face with a counselor on going over their monthly budget, how to create a budget, or maybe getting out of debt. Okay, the education portion, we go out to the communities and teach several workshops. The workshops are in several financial literacy topics. Again, credit scores, budgeting, student financial aid, a wide variety. Okay.
Great, Suzanne.
Well, hi again. Suzanne Martindale, staff attorney at Consumers Union in the San Francisco office. I'm in the advocacy division of Consumer Reports. For those who don't already know, Consumer Reports for about 78 years now has been out there providing expert independent advice to consumers on a range of topics. Most famous, I think, for the product ratings that we have long been publishing, but also always providing tips and trying to help consumers make smarter decisions. I also will put in a special plug for our ever-growing Spanish language website, Consumer Reports en Español. It is español.consumerreports.org. There was a lot of wonderful content on that website. I was looking at the page this morning, the money page, which has a lot of information about how to protect yourself against payment card fraud, because a lot of consumers have actually been telling us directly they're concerned about all these data breaches, right, at Home Depot, at Target, where everyone and their mother shops. And so we are trying to expand the range of topics that we can provide in Spanish language. And I'll also talk a little bit more about what we're doing to sort of broaden and diversify the way we try to deliver that information to consumers so that it's relevant and put in the right context for them and meaningful.
Great, thank you. Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Fohl. I'm the Vice President and General Counsel of ACA International. For those of you who are unaware of what ACA International is International is the largest and longest-standing national trade association for professionals in the credit and collections industry. We bring around 3,500 third-party debt collection companies, law firms, asset buying companies, creditors, and industry vendors, vendors together. We provide a variety of products and services and publications, including educational content and compliance-related information to our members. And we also strive to articulate the value of credit in the collection industry to businesses, policymakers, and consumers. ACA and its members are working together with regulators, legislators, and other policymakers to ensure a balanced debt collection system that appropriately protects consumers who have unpaid debt while enabling the efficient collection of unpaid debt for the benefit of all consumers, businesses, and governments alike. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion on behalf of the debt collection industry and look forward to the discussion and the insights from my esteemed panelists and from any insights and questions from the audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you, panelists. I'm going to open up with a very broad question here. To begin, what types of information do LEP consumers need about debt collection? And also, what materials are currently being used by any of your organizations to aid LEP Latinos in understanding debt collections and their rights, if any?
So debt collection is an educational challenge, but it's part of that bigger challenge in financial capability and making choices about money. So we think about how to help people make choices about money. They're probably not going to take advice from someone they've never met sitting in Washington, D.C. But they might take advice from the local library. So we have a program in partnership with local libraries building on an idea that was pioneered by the FINRA Foundation and United Way. And we offer librarians every month a topic idea and the resources to put that program on in their own libraries. We're also offering, librarians told us we don't want to hear from government, we want to talk to each other. So we're offering a way for them to talk to each other about offering financial education in the library for the community. We think that will be a promising one. I'm going to talk a little more when we get more deeply into channels about what we're doing with social services, where we think is another place where people are already going for job training or for another kind of help, and to open that conversation about money and help those frontline social workers to engage in that conversation. Some consumers do want mobile tools, so of course the FTC has the fabulous consumidor.gov. Great site. Its motto right on the front page is Claro y Fácil. And I think that's what we all need to think about when we provide web services. The CFPB has consumerfinance.gov/ES. That's our Spanish language site. It's got questions and answers to 500 commonly asked questions sorted by topic: house, car, debt collection, et cetera. There's more to talk about in terms of what we're doing for our young people and society, but I think we'll get to that later. Consumers can complain in Spanish at 855-411-CFPB, and they will both get an opportunity to get some possible resolution of their own individual complaint, and also they will feed what happened to them right into the CFPB system, and we look at those complaints for enforcement purposes, and we look at them when we exercise our supervisory responsibilities. If people are looking for Ask CFPB in English, they'll find that at consumerfinance.gov as well. We did announce today we have made available now in Spanish the instructions and the text of 5 sample letters that people can use in debt collection. You often do need a lawyer in debt collection, and we do not want to discourage that, but we heard this morning many people can't get one, don't know where to go for one. So these letters, there's one that says, hey, it's not my debt, and tells people how to send that in and what to do. There's one that says, please stop calling me. There's one that says, I'm willing to talk to you, but contact me in this way. There's one that says, talk to my lawyer. And there's one we hope will be useful for many, many people that says, I need more information. Here's what I'd like to know about the debt. Because people do want to pay their debts, but first they want to know it is their debt. We have Spanish language brochures available through the government printing office. And as was mentioned by Mr. Ellman on the earlier panel, we have web pages in 8 languages, including English and Spanish. The other languages are Vietnamese, traditional Chinese, Korean, Russian, Tagalog, and Haitian Creole. And those are still being built out at the moment. What they offer is the ability to figure out how to get right to the proper language line to make a complaint.
Great, thank you. Maritza, Suzanne, do you want to add anything to that?
In our agency, during a counseling session, what we try to do is we try to inform the consumer regarding the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. We give them a kind of like a list of the do's or don'ts that the collectors can't do, so they can't call before 8 a.m., all that, all those goodies. I think there's like a total of 40 bullet points, and I think that's a really wide eye-opener for them, because most of the consumers that walk in through our door don't even know they have such rights, and normally they're being harassed by these debt collectors using fear, and so they're fear that, oh, I'm going to go to jail, or I'm fear that, something's bad going to happen. But once they know their rights, especially regarding, again, as Gail mentioned, validating the debt, that's something that, it kind of empowers them. And that's what we try to do, is empowering the consumer.
Great. Suzanne, can you talk a little bit more about what you guys have?
Sure. Well, we do not provide direct legal services, unfortunately, to consumers. And as a consumers union employee, despite my bar license, I'm not supposed to give legal advice. But of course, I always love to, take a phone call and provide information and referrals. I consider it part of my job description, particularly in this case, to know about resources in terms of credit counseling, bar referral lines, who are the local legal aid and legal services organizations who may be able to offer some help, although we have talked about how there was an incredible scarcity problem in the debt collection context, because in many cases there are people who just don't quite fit into the category of I can either pay for a lawyer or qualify for free legal aid, where free legal aid is even available in your county, which it is not available in all too many counties, unfortunately. So we do take direct requests for information, at least from consumers. And again, I think what we've heard from so many people today is that despite the fact that there is a lot of information floating out there in multiple languages, it's not hitting people at the right times, or they're not finding the way to access it. Somehow they're not really sure, where to go. And at the bottom, they're consistently surprised at the extent to which they really do have some rights that they can exercise. That is all too familiar to hear, and it means, I think, that we all, I hope as a result of this conference and other gatherings like this, will band together, because we have so many collective resources and so many collective wonderful minds in this room. There's got to be a way to crack the nut on this, but I think that it's still a question of what each of us in our individual agencies can do. But yeah, for us, we do provide general information and do take calls, but don't do much in terms of direct services and really providing information specifically about debt collection to consumers.
I think that leads to a broader question as to how we in general can do a better job overall in educating LEP Latinos and other LEP audiences as to their debt collection rights and what they need to know. We live in a very fragmented society in terms of the way that we communicate. So I'd like to know, we have all this information between all of us here on this panel. What are the best practices for getting this information out? What's working at a very local level? What's working at a national level? What have you found that we should know?
I'd like to give two examples from our work at CFPB. Neither one of them is specific to debt collection in particular, but examples of how to reach people and use these channels. And one is very immediate, involving both social media, high tech, but also high touch. We did a project to educate people about the new remittance regulations and the rights that consumers have to make sure the money is getting there and the right amount got there and so on. And we did it in cooperation with the GSA's Gobierno.gov site, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, and the two government agencies in Mexico that are quite similar to the FTC and the CFPB, the General Consumer Regulator and the Consumer Financial Protection Regulator. And this was done with cooperation of the Mexican consulates across the U.S. So people in the consulates, in the waiting rooms, could ask questions that the consulate staff would then send into the Twitter chat, and they were answered live by CFPB experts about the new remittance regs. So people got the service when they were already there for something else. They didn't have to be on Twitter to get their questions answered, and yet the questions they asked were then seen by the over 200,000 followers that these 5 organizations collectively had in social media. So that was one way to get in to a place where people, well, look, they were in the waiting room. They were waiting, and it gave people a chance to get this knowledge and information. That's kind of a put the high touch into high tech example. The other example is the one I mentioned earlier. I want to talk a little bit about our Your Money, Your Goals program. We didn't invent this idea. It was pioneered in Seattle, King County by Jerry DeGreek and his folks. And what they start in a couple of other places, I believe Minnesota was also early in this. What they saw is that if you're working in social services and the person comes in with a problem, chances are they also have a money problem. And the money problem may be complicating whatever other problem the social service is trying to solve. So we created Your Money, Your Goals and tested it on 1,400 social workers around the country. And they told us how to make it better. They told us to make it shorter and to make it simpler. And the program is now fully available online. You can see it at consumerfinance.gov in English and in Spanish. And what it does is it's a modular toolkit with training so that if you are a social worker in any place in the country, or you're in a job training program or in another way providing social services, you can pull that down, read the instructions that talk about when and how to introduce a money conversation. We found that many social workers were deeply uneasy with, like, I'm not an expert about money, how can I talk about this? And then it has specific worksheets and toolkits to work through with the individual being served on things like ordering your credit report, reading your credit report once you get it, and some very practical things tied to the provision of social services for job training programs. For example, it's got a whole section on how to get your paycheck. And we don't say you should do it this way or that way. We give the pros and cons and talk about the steps a person would have to take for things like opening a bank account, taking your money on a prepaid card, pros and cons of some of the other approaches. So what we're hearing back from social workers is, this makes it easier for me to serve my clients, makes it easier for me to do my job. Thank you for respecting what my role is and giving me a chance to help figure out how to do this. And of course, it also has some signals telling people when to send people on to credit counseling and to other local services where they can get financial counseling in more depth.
Great.
On a local level, what's worked for us is collaborating with other organizations that already provide services to LEP Latinos. So as Gail mentioned, the Mexican Consulate, we're very fortunate that our Mexican Consulate's literally 5 blocks from our agency. So we're constantly there. They've invited us over their labor rights weeks, their Semana de Financias, which is their finance week, I think. And so we're there constantly, providing information, doing mini workshops, so it's not necessarily lengthy, but just providing the main topics of what Latinos should know regarding either, again, credit, identity theft, or budgeting, or savings. A lot of people don't save. It's amazing to know how, like, they live paycheck to paycheck, but if they knew how to budget, yeah, they could find those $5 there, and then $5 leads to $20, $25. And so once they know those tools, then, it's something that provides a good knowledge to them. But again, going back to working with other organizations, for us, we're headquartered in Orange County. We work with the Orange County Social Services Agency. We send them literature. We're sometimes, kind of collaborating on maybe events that they have, or just having literature there where, again, as Gail mentioned, Latinos are already going there for other services, and yet they see, oh, consumer credit counseling. I have, trouble with debt. They might pick up a brochure or so forth.
What I'm hearing here is high tech, high touch as well. There's a combination of things that seems to really need to happen when we reach out to LEP Latinos. And I'm just curious if any of you can talk a little bit more about the role of trusted advisors also in that, because I'm thinking of the high touch component of that. How has that changed over the years? Has it changed? Who are these trusted advisors that LEP Latinos basically go to? What channels are we using currently?
We heard it this morning, but the statistics bear it out. Family and friends are number one at 58%. That's where people go for financial. And of course, that raises the question of how are we going to seed that group of family and friends with somebody who knows enough about these to give the right kind of information, the right kind of referrals. For the general populace, it's about 40% say family and friends is first. For Latinos, number two, in terms of what they say in a survey, seems to be media, that they do rely on the news media and the kind of Telemundos and Univisions of the world for that information. And I'm blanking out on what number three is, but it was, number three is quite interesting. It's banks and credit unions. So they do go to the place in the neighborhood and ask those questions. And that means there's three places where we need to be able to get to people. We do have to worry a little bit about trusted advisors because family and friends sometimes include people who are engaged in affinity fraud. And so we need to, trust and verify, and that can be quite an issue for people across the spectrum, but particularly in language-specific groups, affinity fraud can be a problem. For the elderly, we have Money Smart for older adults in English and Spanish, and it's designed to help old people become a little less trusting about the offers that are made to them by warning them about red flags, and takes the approach of, learn this, help yourself, help your community.
I just want to mention regarding the family and friends, so true, all the consumers that we see through our counseling doors, I heard you guys through a friend or so forth. One of the issues, again, is some of the information that's provided by the family or friend might be incorrect, and yeah, that's an issue that we have. Why was told this happens, and no, that's not the way it works. Mm-hmm.
Well, I like, one of the fun things about being at, Consumer Reports is that we often find that the people that come to us are already pretty proactive and want to get the right answer because they not only want to inform themselves, but they do want to fix mom's problem, or they do want to help their friends. So we like to hope that we can be the first seeder, at least in that person's social network anyway, to get the information out. But since you mentioned media, I would also mention that we have had wonderful response and great success actually partnering with Univision over the last several years. Our wonderful Spanish language outreach coordinator, Elena Chavez, who's based in our New York headquarters, provides content on a range of different consumer topics, but the money topics are very, very popular. And so we have a relationship with Univision in New York, and have also attended some events that they have sponsored to provide, do tabling, and to also provide just some face-to-face time. But that's another very trusted brand that people will go to, as is Telemundo, of course, that has their wonderful programming as well. So that's a good one because it also isn't a focus so much on newer technology, but on trusted brands that come across the television screen.
Just curious
Can I chime in here just for a second?
Yeah.
Something that Maritza mentioned, I think, has resonated with me, and that's the idea of not just information being available, but some misinformation that can be out there. And what our association has done in the last, over 5 years ago now, our association put together a consumer-facing website called Ask Dr. Debt. And we put that out there to ensure that consumers had balanced and good information related to what it's like to deal with a debt collector. And so that website's been there for over 5 years. Has had over 250,000 unique visitors to the site, and the site's available in Spanish as well. And it lists common questions related to the debt collection process. I think there's over 750 questions that are on that site with answers to those questions. They're categorized, I think much like Gail mentioned, they're categorized in different areas: collection calls, disputes, garnishments, service member issues, statute of limitations, et cetera. But it also provides some consumer resources as well, and some links and facts that would be beneficial to consumers generally, and certainly the LEP consumers as well. So I think the misinformation idea is a very strong idea that's out there, that whether it's intentional misinformation or it's urban legend or whatever, I think the important thing is making sure that factual and balanced information is out there about consumers' rights and about what it's really like to deal with legitimate professional debt collectors.
Great. I want to just go back really quick to the high tech. For example, we're dealing with a very specific audience here, LEP Latinos, that, sure, a lot of them, many of us do have cell phones, but I wonder sometimes how well they're getting that information through that. So in your experiences with LEP Latinos, how do they prefer to get their information? What is the most successful way? Are mailings still predominant? Is it, again, you know, the high touch? Is it through that online presence, or is it just a really holistic approach overall on a case-by-case basis?
I'm gonna let you go first and then Adam.
I think for CCCS, we see that it's still face-to-face, telephone. Rarely do we see them go into our website. And again, maybe because they were not aware of our website or so forth, but again, since we get referrals mainly through family and friends, they just pick up the phone and give us a call. But I do want to mention that, you know, Suzanne's correct. I mean, I think one of our counselors mentioned that, you know, the reason why this person came was because she heard it in the news. Oh, I heard identity theft is on the rise. I wanted to get informed. And yeah, it was through Univision. So I know, you know, people watch those soap operas, you know, telenovelas, and then, oh, a las 11, you know, coming up at 11, you know, and they stay to watch that segment. Yeah. So again, I think media in that sense is a really good media to get the word across.
I just want to agree. I think we're going to have to be holistic. We have to go everywhere that people are going. These are busy folks. We know there's a large percentage in the LEP folks who are working not one job but two jobs. We think the workplace, particularly for low-wage and moderate-wage workers, is going to be incredibly important, and the Bureau has a report out talking about easy things that employers can do, and interviewing some employers who talked about how they think it's helping their own bottom line in terms of employee loyalty, employee, you know, showing up and having their head in the game in terms of working and not worrying about that call from the debt collector that came in last night or this morning at 8:30. And we also think that we have got to get financial education and financial money practicing opportunities to our nation's school children. Now, I can't actually see you because of these lights, but I always like to ask this question. There have probably lots and lots of people in this room who speak more than one language, so raise your hand if you do, because then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. Now, keep your hand up if you learned that other language, one of those languages, for just one semester in high school. Right, this is, oh, okay, someone's not telling the truth there. This is not how we learn. We learn by practicing. We learned by what happens in the home, and that means parents have to talk to their kids about money, even if you're talking about what you wish you had known sooner. Even better if you have something more specific. But whatever it is, the fact that we're talking to our kids about money tells them it's a subject that everyone struggles with, and it's okay to ask questions, to seek help, to seek out places like credit counseling. We have to have it in schools, and we can't wait till high school. It's just too late.
And can you speak a little more, some of the other panelists, about other underutilized channels of communication out there that maybe we haven't thought of? Because Gail actually made some really good points, the workplace, schools, things like that. Is there anything else that we're missing in order to better communicate this type of information to LEP Latinos?
Well, I think there are variations on that same theme. I have heard from not so much actually consumers, but from advocates who work more directly with consumers on debt issues. This is particularly true in the case of, I want to say, those who have unfortunately taken out a very predatory loan product. That they're in some cases it's I'm an adult learner, I'm going back to school and I'm asking my professor these questions. It could be I'm asking, a fellow member of my congregation. At PTA meetings, parents are talking to each other about these things. So wherever there is a sort of a commons, there is a potential, there's an opportunity there for education and of course for miseducation as well. And so for those of us as advocates, what we need to think through is, who is in the best position to deliver and to have an interaction directly with the consumer. And so how should that interaction look, and what should the information look like in that context? And then for those who have, the technical expertise or the resources to create materials, are you creating them directly for the consumer, or maybe should you just train the trainers, create materials that are better shaped for the people who can be better positioned to deliver that message? So there's different ways that you need to think through, who's in the best position to do what, and thereby what are the best channels, and then how do you frame that information so that it's meaningful?
I think the Gail's mention about getting into schools is a really important thought. And members of ACA, many members of ACA International, on their own initiative, go into the local schools of their communities to talk about money management generally, and then specifically what they do for a living as debt collectors, and how your money management choices can lead toward debt collection. And so there are many members of ACA International that are very active in their communities, and they're an extension of all the businesses in their communities, and they go into to local schools and they speak about these matters because there's a real recognition that that students are going through our educational system without having basic money management skills, and it's one way our association members try to assist with that educational effort for all consumers, not just LEP consumers.
Can any of you talk about any specific strategies for partnering with organizations in order to get this information out?
So one thing that we have been doing in the Financial Empowerment Office in partnering particularly on Your Money, Your Goals is really listening first. Talking to people about what would it take to bring this into your program? Which parts would you feel comfortable bringing into your program? What service would we need to provide to you to bring it in? We're not a grant-making agency, and so of course, the first question always is, how are we going to fund the staff that's going to do the work? And that's a tremendous challenge around the country for all kinds of services that are trying to add money services. But people told us the other kinds of things that they needed. They needed good training. They needed someone. They want us to train people, at least one person on site in their own place, so that person could become a trainer for others. They wanted it to be very modular. They didn't want to feel like I have to teach the whole book because they're in a different business. They wanted to know just very simply, I could go to chapter 12 and talk about credit reporting, and I could go to chapter 2 and help somebody to understand, am I carrying too much debt already? How do I think about adding another debt versus the needs? They wanted some very simple material to talk to people about budgeting. But we find that really listening to what people want at the intermediary level is incredibly important because it has to belong to them and not just be something that came from Washington.
What was the question again? Sorry.
What works?
For us, it's definitely collaboration with other organizations. We're a member of the Orange County Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and so that provides a lot of network opportunities for us, whether it's going to be insurance agents or so forth. We let them know about our services, and sometimes they say, oh, you know what, I do have a client with this issue. Then they know that, they forward the client on to us. Also, when we get invited to do a resource fair, okay, we provide a booth of information. There's other organizations at the same resource fair that could use that information as well. And so again, we provide literature, we connect, we create contacts, and then a relationship starts at that point.
Great.
I think, can I just chime in here? I think one thing to think about, you're asking what works. I think these topics are really ripe for innovation and innovative partnerships, and I think that's something that we all should be thinking about. That obviously this isn't an issue that just cropped up. This has been around for a while, and maybe we don't know exactly what totally works and what totally doesn't work, but it seems like it's ripe for innovation and innovative partnerships. Just anecdotally, I know that one of our members has partnered with a financial education service provider. And granted, we've been talking about, getting in early and educating early is an important thing. And once somebody is in debt and being subject to debt collection, it's probably not the optimal time to educate. But that being said, there's an opportunity there as well. And so what this member of ours did was partner with a financial education service provider to provide an actual reduction in the amount that the consumer owes if the consumer goes through some online modules related to financial education, specifically financial education related to debt collection. And you might say, well, why would they do something like that? Well, the reality is that it's a win-win. The consumer gets a win by getting access to education. Financial education certainly gets a win of the member reducing the amount of debt that they would owe. And on the member side of things, the goal is really to foster communication and engagement with the consumer. The important thing for professional debt collectors is to be able to communicate with consumers. And professional debt collectors are very skilled at trying to resolve problems. They're problem solvers, and so they want to work with consumers to solve problems. But that necessitates an open communication between a consumer and the debt collector. And so this innovative partnership seems to be a win-win on all levels to enable that communication to happen, while at the same time providing for some education, and then certainly the monetary benefit of a reduction in the amount of debt that they owe.
There's one more thing that we know can work and has been proven to work on the financial capability side, but it's not going to help today's adults who are in debt. It's for tomorrow's adults, and that's savings accounts for kids, particularly savings accounts in the kids' own names. Some of you know about Kindergarten for College, the San Francisco program, where they're opening a savings account for every kindergartner in public school, unless the parents say no thank you. So that's nearly every kindergartner in City and County of San Francisco. That's a smaller county, of course, but there's some good learning there. There's an excellent study out of the Midwest where they controlled for family income and they controlled for the amount saved, and they still found that a savings account in a 15-year-old's own name made them 6 to 7 times more likely to go to college if they had a college ambition, and then the question was, did they follow up on that ambition and actually achieve college? 6 to 7 times more likely. And there's a new study out of Kansas saying that between having just $1 to $500 in an account, those kids were 4 times more likely to achieve their college dreams. So that's something specific we can all do as parents. We can all do as extended family members if the parents are not in a position to talk to their kids about savings. And we don't know. I talked to the author of this WILT study, the 6 to 7 times study. I asked him, why? Why is this happening? He said, I don't know, but I think it's because it changes the community, the family, and the young person's own expectations about their economic futures and their ability to attain college.
Just going to back up a really question on one of these final questions here. At the FTC, and we deal a lot in trying to educate consumers about fraud and scams in the marketplace in general, and what we've experienced sometimes with our Spanish-speaking consumers is that they are victims of certain type of fraud and scams because someone reached out to them in their language, was part of their community, and they trusted them, and they scammed them. At a grassroots level, or from some of your experiences, do you feel that LEP Latinos in general are starting to become more wary or more conscientious of people trying to help them in their own language? And how have maybe you had to change your tactics or strategies related to that, if at all?
I think we have a lot more work to do for all kinds of consumers about this question of when to trust and how much to trust. And there are some very simple red flags, but it's just very hard in the moment because that person who is making a personal outreach to you looks trustworthy. They're nice to you, they're courteous, it sounds too good to be true, that's one of those red flags. But to the degree that when we talk with our older American constituents, we talk about speak up and speak out. Speak up and ask questions about the deal, and speak out if you are smart enough to say no thank you and tell your friends. And we need to create that kind of culture all across America about if it has to be decided today, it's probably something you want to say no to.
During the whole financial crisis of 2009, we saw a lot of people who went to those pay for a loan modification. They paid over and over, and nothing happened. And I think that kind of did make them weary. They were approached, oh, you have problems with your mortgage, we could help you. And then they were kind of, again, given the whole, don't worry, just pay us, we'll get this settled, you don't need to worry. And then, of course, it was some type of fraud. I think that has become, they become weary. But I do know that usually Latinos, when they talk to someone face to face and they kind of see, what, this person does look trustworthy, they kind of cling to that person, And I'm not sure if it's more of a cultural, but unfortunately, we haven't really changed our tactics on how to convince them. But I think it's just based on the individual, how they kind of perceive the person that they're talking to.
Terrific.
We're really sensitive to scammers and fraud perpetrators who are posing as debt collectors. They're not debt collectors, they're scammers and they're fraud perpetrators who are posing as debt collectors. And so we try to ensure that we're hitting the media from time to time with messaging around consumers' rights related to debt collection, the fact that informing consumers that debt collectors can't be anonymous. They have to identify themselves, so you should expect identification, and if they don't give it to you, you should be asking for it. And the fact that they shouldn't confirm or provide sensitive information until they're certain of the authenticity of the debt and the person collecting it. So we're pretty sensitive because really our industry, when you see a media headline that talks about a debt collector who did something terrible, collecting a debt that they don't have the right to collect or might not even exist, just trying to get people to pay them money, it ends up painting a picture on the professional debt collection industry that's not a very good picture. So we try to affirmatively get out there in the media to allow consumers, including LEP consumers, to understand what their rights are and that there might be some signals when there are fraud perpetrators and scammers who are trying to pose as debt collectors.
Before I ask for some closing remarks to the panelists, I just want to jump on Rob's remarks really quick and do a little shameless plug regarding debt collection rights for consumers. The FTC today just came out with a brand new fotonovela about debt collectors and knowing your rights, and it is in Spanish and it is geared to LEP Latinos, and it's available at our website at ftc.gov/fotonovela for anybody who wants to order any number of copies. So, panelists, then, before we take a couple of questions from the audience that I have here before me, is there anything else that you want to mention or regarding education and outreach to LEP Latinos and debt collection and credit reporting that you think we should know?
It's a big job. It's going to take all of us to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is going to take a lot of collaboration with partners, to move forward.
Yeah, just to reiterate a little bit of what I said before, I think that we do have a lot of collective energy and resources and important information that, if we target the right people in the right ways and maximize each of our strengths and our individual capacities as, direct service provider or as government agency or as consumer advocacy group or as, industry partner, I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can customize and deliver the right kind of information to people. And also, it's very important, the point was made that we're not talking about a monolithic group of people here. As much as we get calls from people who are concerned about debt collection, we also get calls from people with limited English proficiency who are looking to save, who are looking to, hey, actually, I have a little bit of money I've been saving away. How do I invest it? So allowing people to not just be aware of all these bad things, also remembering that we have a job to do to lift people up and to give them a sense that they can empower themselves and that they can achieve better security, because that, again, insulates against some of the unfortunate and occasionally horrifying stories that you hear of people who have fallen into a really unfortunate situation because of a debt problem.
And I would just say, obviously, it's an ongoing, large, and critical issue, especially when you think about the demographics of our country, in the next 20 or 30 years. But I think collectively, we're all up to the challenge to help solve for it.
Great. I'm going to read a couple of questions that we received from the audience. The first question is, what kind of messaging do you find most effective? Or is it, here are your rights, here's important information, or watch out? What type of messaging is most effective?
I think this is a real challenge because people do not see themselves as victims. So the kind of watch out, it could happen to you. We've done some focus group work that suggests that one of the interesting ways to communicate kind of rules of thumb is not to say, here's what I should do, here's what you should do, but here's what you would tell a young person who you're advising. Here's what you would tell someone who you're trying to help, and that is an easier way for people to hear and hang on to those principles and precepts.
We are all actually in the process of doing some testing around how we present information on Consumer Reports en Español and what types of metaphors we use to describe the information. And one of the, and also some of the testing is just around disseminating information via our social media channels and sort of seeing what comes back, how many click-throughs do we get, how many likes, how many shares, and some of those very simple tools that are a low-cost way to test your messaging. And the conceptual metaphor of financial health seemed to be one that really resonated with people. They liked the idea of doing things to improve your financial health. I think that sounds, the notion of health, the notion of this being so central to your life, something like your health, I think that has some weight, but also the idea of improving your financial health, it sounds like something that would be a natural thing for someone to want to do, and it sounds like something that you can do, which I think making this sound like it's doable. I think something about that metaphor just tested very well for us, so that's something that we use a lot in our Spanish language materials.
Excellent. The next question that we have from our audience is there a high standard approach for lenders to educate LEP Latinos regarding debt and collections at the time of loan origination? If so, please elaborate.
So is there what kind of standard?
Is there a highest standard approach for lenders to educate LEP Latinos regarding debt and collections at the time of loan origination?
I am not aware of any standards in this area, but it sounds as if the questioner is suggesting that the more the consumer understands the debt obligation when they undertake it, preferably before they undertake it, the better off they're going to be and the less likely we'll end up in collection. That's certainly true.
In my experience, I've seen it more with federal student loans. I think it's now required for them to take some type of, I'm gonna say like either a test or they have to, take this assessment online before they take out loans to make sure that, they understand what they're getting into, the different types of loans. And I think it's also required to exit when you finally, when you finish your school, then again, that's another addition. Lenders, I'm not sure. I mean, I know probably those payday loans, they're required, but they have very fine print, somewhere hidden. Yeah, I don't think they do a good job about it.
Well, one example, this is actually a policy change in California, is that AB 1700 recently passed, which actually, this is in the context of older consumers who may be looking into a reverse mortgage. Will have to perform, will have to use a worksheet that the lender must provide to them prior to being able to originate the loan. And this is actually a concept that it was a bill that we worked on in conjunction with AARP and also with a psychology professor who had found that the activity involved in filling these out actually enabled better decision-making on the part of the borrower. And so those are the kinds of things. The interactivity aspect is another way to ensure that people are making smarter decisions.
This question specifically for Gail. If the CFPB is providing Spanish instructions on how to send an English letter, the debt collector will not know the consumer is LEP Latino. Therefore, the response will be in English. So do the instructions help the discussion and flow of information?
So this is an interesting question for us to think about, whether there should be a box on the bottom of the form saying my language preference is. We'll take that one back and think about it. The way, we looked at whether the letter should go in English or in Spanish, but we wanted to make sure the collectors who received the letter would know what to do with it. We wanted to make sure that it would be legally effective, because some of them do invoke legal rights. So what we settled on was the instructions are in Spanish, the full translation of the letter is in Spanish, and this means instead of having your kid look at that website with you and read that English letter to you, you can do it after bedtime in the privacy and dignity of the adults in the household, looking at that together and not having to perhaps involve a family member or a child in the translation process. So we didn't think about the possibility of using that letter for one extra purpose, which is to say, here's my preferred language. That's something we'll think about.
One of the other questions we have from the audience is, why not outreach to schools, K through 6, parents advisory groups, senior service centers, college campuses that use social media? I mean, from our discussion today, I have heard that that has been happening, but maybe some of you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Who wants to go first? I'm happy to do it. Yeah, we are, well, social media takes you a certain, basically you can use it to tell people, here's something to look into further. You're not going to do a lot of direct education there. It's a kind of a hook, come and see. In the higher touch area, we have the social worker program. We'll be rolling out variations of that early in the new calendar year for legal services, and also a volunteer version, so people in faith communities and other places where people essentially are acting as volunteer social workers will have a chance to access that material and use it in their congregations.
And then, I mean, for CCCS, we do go to schools, teach there. High schools or local colleges, we're there as well. So.
Well, I can certainly say when it comes to student loan issues, college students today are really thirsty for more information and are certainly much more aware of the financial consequences of paying for college. I'm seeing a huge uptick in savvy in the last few years, which is really encouraging, although it's, doesn't mean that we fixed the problem by a long shot. But when it comes to the work that we can do, we all often work in close partnership with groups like PERG, that have campus chapters where they can be on the ground to advise. I mean, we've been talking about advising smarter choices for borrowing for college, and also the credit reporting implications of taking out student debt and the importance of repaying your student loan, because it's maybe the first chance that you have, because many of the undergraduate loans are not underwritten, right? You get them if you qualify, if you have a social security number and you fill out the paperwork and there's no major expected family contribution, you can take out a bunch of money. And I don't think that there's enough education around credit reporting for college students. That's an idea. We're not doing it yet, but it's something that we've been thinking about, because again, hitting on the different aspects of these important choices is really important. And in college, probably too late for having really those comprehensive skills that you would hope to see developed over a child's childhood before entering adulthood, but still another place to that. But I think working with campus groups would be a great way to do that at the college level.
We do also have something that is very effectively promoted through social media called Paying for College. It's a web tool at consumerfinance.gov. The heart of it is the ability to input financial aid offers and have the software pop up and tell you, if you take this offer at this school, here's what the monthly payment's going to be for 10 years after you graduate. And the idea is to not only help young people with that particular decision, but to build the comparison and shopping skills over time. And the most popular section of that tool actually is the part about repayment. And it walks students, or more likely recent graduates, through all the steps for the various ways to keep their and protect their credit while making a lower payment because their income is not sufficient to support the current payment.
I'm going to just ask one final question here. I think maybe, Rob, you can speak to this a little bit. But what role, if any, should debt collectors play in educating consumers? The FDCPA requires them to provide some info about rights to dispute, for example. Are these rights clearly explained?
Yeah, they certainly have some obligations under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and other applicable law. I think you've heard it on the panels, even earlier today, panels 1 and 2, where there's some discussion about the fact that when you're a debt collector and you're trying to resolve a debt, part of what you're trying to do is provide context and understanding and education about the particular debt to consumers who might not understand that. And so just at a very fundamental base level, if there's communication between a debt collector and a consumer, many times the debt collector starts out through an educational process about what this debt is, how it walked through the process. Certainly if it's a medical debt, a lot of times there's issues related to insurance and co-pays and co-insurance and all those sorts of things where the debt collector is providing that sort of information and education for a consumer so the consumer understands that the debt is there, understands that the debt is owing, or if the consumer believes that the debt amount is wrong or that they don't owe the debt, they can then have the context to be able to communicate that, and then their legal rights can be protected through those processes that are outlined in the law. So at a very base fundamental level, there's a lot of education that goes on right from the individual debt collector to the consumer, along with the other things that I talked about earlier on the panel.
Fantastic. It looks as if we're running out of time, so I just want to thank our panelists for today for our great conversation that we have, and let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you, everybody.
So we have our last group, and that is to have Gail Hilbrand and Chris Cagle, Gail from CFPB, and Chris, who's behind me from the FTC, talk about lessons learned, next step. I just wanted to mention something about Chris. Chris is Assistant Director in our Division of Financial Practices at the FTC. He's really overseen our enforcement activities on debt collection, and because I know he's not going to do this himself, he, for the FTC, was a main architect of this conference, and this is Chris Cagle.
Thanks, Tom. So Gail and I are just going to give some brief kind of summing up, conclusory remarks. I want to start by thanking everyone who came here and devoted the better part of a day to participating and in this important conversation about debt collection and the Latino community. I think it was really a great discussion throughout the day. We had some really fantastic panels, but I think we can all agree that the real star of today's proceedings has to be Rigo's grandmother. We put out, as Christina noted today, a photo novella on debt collection, and one of the main protagonists in that photo novella is actually a grandmother who has some very similar issues to what Rigo put forward. So from now on, I'm always going to think of Rigo's grandmother when I look at that photo novella. All joking aside, I think we did learn a lot today. We heard about some really important issues, and I think it would start with some of the early information we heard in the very first presentations and speeches. This issue of debt collection in the Latino community is really, I think, at a critical moment right now. We've heard how this population is booming. We know that there are a lot of recent immigrants in this population, that there are some language challenges as they adapt to our culture, and that there's some evidence to suggest that this population may be a little bit more vulnerable to some of the economic fluctuations that this country's experienced in the last couple of years. Also, they're not quite as familiar yet with all of the processes of debt collection, of litigation, of credit reporting. And we also heard that some of these financial issues affect not only the current generation, but reverberate down to successive generations. So I have no doubt in my mind that this is a critical moment, these are critical issues, and that it's really important for the FTC, the CFPB, the state AGs, all the great organizations that were part of the conversation today to address these issues. We looked at 4 key aspects of this. throughout the day. Collections, litigation, credit reporting, education. And I'm just going to note some of the key things that I heard today where I thought there was a little bit of consensus or that were really interesting. I know Gail has some things that she picked up on and wants to highlight as well. First, we heard that collectors may not learn of limited English proficiency until perhaps as late as that very first phone contact with the consumer. However, there seemed to be a consensus up on the panels that the preferred language of the consumer could and should be part of that initial data file that gets transferred when a debt is transferred. And I think that would be an important step if we could find a way to do that. Second, I heard in a couple of different contexts really that simple translation from English to Spanish is not going to be the be-all, end-all solution. For instance, we heard that certain terms carry connotations that are different in the Latino community than they would be in an English-speaking community. Agencia, for instance, carrying a connotation of government affiliation. A collection agency, that's a common term in the English-speaking community that not many people would think carries connotation that it could be a government agency, but that may not be the case in the Latino community. Similarly, some consumers think that the word notario means that an attorney is involved, and that licenciado, I'm mangling this, but I apologize, may also mean that an attorney is involved. Also, we heard that it's not just the language, but it can be cultural and history that are unique to Latinos, and that can have an effect on the process. So for instance, we heard that some Latinos may feel more guilt or shame about owing a debt. We heard that debt can often be a little bit more of a family affair or a familial issue in the Latino community, and that there's some concern that in some Latin countries they still have debtors' prisons, and so some of that historical cultural knowledge may persist as some of these communities adapt to the American culture. We also heard that Latinos are often less reluctant to give their personal sensitive information to collectors, and that has an effect on the collection process. Notwithstanding all of those things, what I also heard loud and clear is that the Latino community is not monolithic, and that it would be a huge mistake for the FTC, the CFPB, or any other agency to treat it as such. In the litigation context, we heard that language translation services can be really key in helping Latinos understand collection litigation, but like most things in life, there are costs involved, and those costs are significant. And that I hope that we can learn from the experiences in Colorado, California, and New Mexico as we study how to adapt those services into the litigation context and help Latinos understand litigation more. Finally, we heard that we need to do a much better job of educating Latinos in a number of different ways, but particularly in the credit reporting context. They need to understand the importance of pulling their credit report and how to dispute errors. Moving forward, these issues are very important to the FTC, and I'm sure to the CFPB as well. The things that we learned here today and that we will continue to learn as we build our relationships with everyone in this audience, that information is going to inform our law enforcement efforts, and I think you're seeing some of that already today, the FTC announcing its case against Centro Natural. It's also going to inform our consumer education efforts. As I said, just today we published a debt collection photo novella, which again you can find at ftc.gov/FOTONOVELA. And I'm just going to give a quick plug party for some other consumer education materials that the FTC has. So we have our excellent consumer ed website, which can be found at consumer.ftc.gov, and also in Spanish at consumidor.ftc.gov. You can also subscribe to fraud alerts in Spanish at ftc.gov/connectese, CONECTESE. And you can always forward consumer complaints to the FTC in a number of different places. So we have ftc.gov/complaint, ftc.gov/queja, QUEJA, if you want to do so in Spanish. And we have our hotline as well, 877-FTC-HELP, where consumers can talk to a specialist in both English and Spanish. We also have a wealth of printed out consumer education materials just outside that door on a table. Please take as many as you want. We brought enough for everybody. You can take a whole pack of them, as many as you want. We brought quite a bit. If that's not enough, you can also bulk order consumer education materials at ftc.gov/bulk order. Before I turn it over to Gail, I want to make sure that I thank everyone who helped make this wonderful event happen. You know, you may not understand, but it is no easy undertaking to put an event like this together. It's even harder when it's a bit of a road game for us. So I don't think it's an overstatement to say that it takes a village. I'll start by thanking all the wonderful panelists who donated their time today. I also want to thank the university, including the president, Dr. Jane Connolly, the College of Health and Human Services Dean, Kenneth Miller, and the Family and Consumer Sciences Chair, Dr. Wendy Reibel, in addition to Dr. Peter Kresa, for making this great venue available to us and helping us to put on this wonderful event. They really dedicated a lot of their time and energy to helping us make this happen. I also want to thank our partners at the CFPB. As you can see, we work seamlessly together. There is no daylight between our two agencies. We are true partners in the debt collection sphere. And so I hope I don't forget anybody here from the CFPB. And Gail, you fill me in if I miss anyone. John Pitts, who really was instrumental in working with Tom Kane and leading this effort. Beverly Young, Brenda Muniz, Tom Paul, Laura Van Dyke, Gail Hillebrand, Hans Ledger, Zixta Martinez, Beverly Bogarty, and Carmen Cruz. They all were instrumental in helping us put this together. Finally, I want to thank my wonderful team at the FTC. Tom Kane is now becoming an old hand at putting together these joint roundtables, and if I ever do this again, he's certainly going to be on the team. In addition, Christina Miranda from our DCBE, Ann Stahl, who is from our LA office and helped put together the relationships, Maricela Segura, Tom Carter, Tom Dadu, Dan Dwyer, Beatrice Burke, and some of our other DCBE professionals, Carrie Galula and TJ Peeler. And finally, I'll thank the support professionals who've helped make all this work today as well. With that, Gail, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We are so seamless that I don't get to read the long thank you list, which I also feel deeply and would like to thank each of you personally. Long Beach State, FTC, my colleagues at CFPB, and all of you from around the West who are working on these issues day in and day out. Thank you. We're here because the problems that debt collection presents for LEP Latinos are real, and they make a real difference in people's economic lives every day. We're here because we hear from consumers who call us every day or go on our website at Ask CFPB. They tell us when they have trouble verifying a debt. And we hear from consumers when they feel a debt collector isn't following the rules. And we hear from consumers when they want to pay, but they can't figure out who the right person is, so they will pay once and not be asked to pay again. We hear about the harm that debt collection problems cause to families, in stress, in lost funds. We heard today about the family impact and the kind of the family economy, an extended family for debt collection, and that means if someone pays a debt that is in the wrong amount or the wrong person, they might be draining not only their own assets, but assets of other family members. We understand that on the information side, we have to give information that is simple, actionable, and accessible, and that we have to go beyond information and figure out how to provide those services and supports that people need in order to use the information. We understand that it's going to be a community-based effort and a community-wide effort to address not only debt collection, but other things that can help consumers to manage their own financial lives. I'm not going to give you the shameless plug for CFPB's materials because I did that earlier, but you can find them all at consumerfinance.gov. We heard today that one size doesn't fit all. And we heard today that cultural sensitivity, not just language access, is important. I'm going to identify a couple of other things we heard. This is tough because, of course, Chris got all the best ones. Then I'm going to share with you a few quotes, a few things people actually said today that resonated highly with me, and leave you with a challenge. So a couple of the things that we heard that collectors and consumers would be benefited if the collector had access to the whole file right at the beginning. We heard the collection folks talk about the importance of their own letters and scripts being multilingual, and there being internal oversight at the collector to make sure those scripts are followed and used appropriately. We heard the collectors talk about the importance of language capacity on their own staffs. We heard that things would be improved for collectors if creditors told them what the consumer's language preference is at the very beginning. We heard about the need for a compliance function from collectors, and we heard about the need for a strong dispute resolutions department. It wasn't all good news. We also heard about some problems. We heard about the problem of a small payment, reaffirming an old debt, and how people can give up a right that they didn't even know they had when they do that. We heard about the lingering issue of multiple collections on the same debt, and there was some dispute about how common that is, but certainly there were a lot of folks who said it was an issue. We heard that there are a lot of issues in medical debt, and that came up repeatedly in today's panels. We had a promising discussion about the idea of a registry of debts. One of the collectors described that as idealistic, but also as in the ideal, I think. And we heard some concerns raised about how that could be done consistent with data security. And Rigo, who always puts things just so concretely, said, well, we figured it out for registering your car. So here are a few other things I heard today that I think resonated with me, and I hope they'll resonate with you as you think about this work going forward. Allison Snow told us it's a marathon for the consumer. Ted Merman told us there's no due process if you're not there, raising the issue about good service and service of process, and also about people getting help in the legal system. We heard from the first panel about the risk of giving information to a collector, how it might suddenly get into the file in a way that implies that that person who gave the information is the right consumer when they're not. We heard about some progress here in California with a new law. We heard Mark Naiman say, every collector needs a full-time compliance officer. We heard Rigo Reyes. Okay, you already heard this one. Debt registering could be like registering a car. That's my personal favorite, I think, for the day. We heard from Harvey Moore that the process of consumer understanding needs to begin well before you get to court. We heard that people need to be aware of their rights from Joseph Amarillo. And we heard that in the rulemaking that CFPB has under consideration, it might be important to explicitly say that threats about immigration status are never appropriate. We heard Sahara Garcia tell us, if you have learned something, share it with the young people in your life. I'm going to move that one up to my personal favorite and just give you, I think, one or two more. We heard both the community advocates and the collectors say something very similar. One said, for my clients, the credit report is their resume. And the other said, your credit report is your advocate. Again, highlighting just how important that material is to consumers. We talked about the role of the family, and I think that's both an opportunity and a risk, particularly in the area of co-signing. We heard a lot that will feed into the CFPB's own work on debt collection, I'm sure to the FTC's work going forward. I hope you heard us say we can't do it alone. We need to be in partnership with each one of you. And I want to leave you with a challenge. Every single minute in America, one person of Hispanic origin turns 18. Every minute of every day of every year, one person turns 18. And for every one of those new adults faces financial choices that will affect their financial futures. A couple of missed car payments at 18 are still going to be affecting the price of credit when that young person is 20 and 22 and 24. And every single one of those young people who becomes an adult without the benefit of effective financial education at home, at school, and in the community is a missed opportunity. So we all have a part to play in making our society better by preparing our youth and by supporting our adults as they work in the very complex financial situation and financial circumstances and financial system that we've created here in America. I look forward to the work we'll do together to improve that. Thank you.